The following presentation is part of the Department of Agronomy and Horticulture Seminar Series at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I thought it would be a good opportunity because I don't get out here very much to Lincoln. Being out in Scotts Bluff, it's about a 6-hour drive if you obey all traffic rules, and you don't have small kids in the car. So I'll be doing that here in about an hour, and we'll see how I make it back. But it's good to be out and to see some new faces and some old faces and get to know some people. And kind of my overreaching goal today is just to kind of, I guess, introduce myself and let folks know who I am and a little bit about the Panhandle. It's a little bit different than eastern Nebraska. Let's put it that way. If you haven't been out there, it's different. And we have a lot of different crops, and I hope to explain some of that, and maybe it'll get some ideas flowing so that in the future, if you guys are working on some projects, you might consider collaborating with some of us out there in the Panhandle. And that's kind of, I guess, my goal. I guess we'll see if this works today or if we need to reset it. Oh, it worked. Okay, so my outline for the talk is just to describe a little bit about some of the resources and facilities we have out there at the Panhandle Center. I'm going to cover some of the different agriculture practices that are pretty common in the Panhandle. Talk about some of the current research that I'm working on, as well as a few other guys in the Dryland department there. And then talk about some of the new ideas and things I'm going to be doing in the near future. And again, hopefully this will maybe spark some discussion and help out. It'll help maybe facilitate some cooperation in the future with some of you. So the Panhandle District, of course, incorporates the Panhandle as well as a few other counties. There's 16 counties total. You'll notice right here in Scotts Bluff, that's where the Research and Extension Center is. You can't get really any closer to Wyoming. It's about 20 minutes from Wyoming. Like I said, it's quite the drive to come to Lincoln, so we don't come too often. When we do, we try to make the best of it and try to get around and see lots of different folks and make it worth our time. Within the Panhandle District, you might think, well, why do we need to have a center out there? The easiest answer is because it's so different from the rest of Nebraska. And in order to serve that clientele out in that area that has such a unique cropping system, it's important to have guys out there that are working for those producers and the growers out in that area. You see this yellow area, that's kind of the high plains. Out in the Panhandle, most of the Panhandle is up around 4,000 feet in elevation. So we're pretty high up, a pretty short growing season. This area in the center there, that's mostly sand hills. We do have a lot of rangeland and cattle out in that area as well. The little red areas, that's all the irrigation. You'll see down, of course, in the south central there's quite a bit of irrigation compared to what we have up in the Panhandle area. If we look at the annual precipitation, this is where probably the biggest difference is across Nebraska, where we have this big gradient as we go across the state. We have about half the rainfall out in the Panhandle compared to the rest of the state. Mostly we're usually average around 15 to 16 inches of rain. This year was a little bit different. I came on in May 1st as when I started, and I got there and it just rained and rained and rained, and I started to think, I don't know why these guys need a dryland cropping system specialist, because there's no dryland out here. We probably had about 7 to 9 inches of rain across the Panhandle in May, which is really crazy considering that's about half of our total rainfall. In addition, about mid-May, we had about a foot of snow come through, and that was, of course, different. So we had cold temperatures, we had rain. At the time the wheat was in the boot stage, it all got laid over, and we thought we might have a big mess on our hand. And the northern half of the Panhandle saw some severe yield reductions this year because of that snow and the cold temperatures, but the bottom half did okay. This is a map that was put together by my predecessor, Dryland, and Bob Klein, showing just the mean summer water balance across the state. It's a little hard to see, but what this is the precipitation minus the evapotranspiration from June through August across the state. And down in the north or the southeast corner there, we see a deficit of about 4 to 5 inches, versus parts of the Panhandle are about 8 to 10 inch deficit, comparing precipitation with ET. Here's another map that was put together by Dryland and Bob Klein, looking at accumulated growing degree days across the state from 1961 to 1990. And so about 41 years there. You can see all the different centers out there. And so again, down in the north or the southeast corner of the state, we had greater than 3,600 growing degree days, versus the severe opposite up there, that blue spot up there, where we had almost half that at less than 2,400 growing degree days. So again, a big difference across the state, and you can see some of the locations of the different facilities that the university has out there. So the Panhandle facilities that we have 5 different facilities across the Panhandle. The main one is the Scottsbluff Ag Lab. That's where the research center is, where all the specialists have their offices. And so that one's right there in Scottsbluff. Just north of Scottsbluff, about 6 to 7 miles, is the Mitchell Ag Lab. That's the old research center. I'm not quite sure when they moved it. I think it was early 1970s or the late 60s to early 70s is when they made that move. And again, it was just down the road. The High Plains Ag Lab is in Sidney, Nebraska, where the Cabela's headquarters is. The High Plains Ag Lab is about 6 miles north of Sidney, and it's primarily dryland production there. And then we have 2 rangelands where we do a lot of grazing studies. And we'll talk a little bit more about each one of these coming up right here. So the Scottsbluff Ag Lab, we have the main offices right here, and around that is a lot of the small plot work that goes on there. That little there within the red is 156 acres of sprinkler irrigated. There is a lateral there. There's going to be a new lateral going in. There's wheel lines, and there's some one small pivot up there as well. The primary crops that are grown around that station include corn, wheat, sugar beets, potatoes, dry beans, and then a few alternative crops or lesser crops like sunflowers, field peas. This year we had some brown mustard, some winter canola. So there's a big variety of crops that goes out there at that center there. Up in the yellow is 80 acres of furrow irrigated ground, primarily in a corn, dry bean, sugar beet rotation. And we do put each area, there's a few studies up there, usually on a larger scale. And it's really close. It's easy to get to from the center. So the Mitchell Ag Lab, this was the old research facility. From basically, it started in the early 1900s, about 1910, and it served as a research center up until the late 1960s. We have 269 acres of irrigated ground. This ground is primarily corn, dry beans, sugar beet rotations. Most of the corn that's grown out there in the Mitchell Ag Lab, as well as Scottsbluff, is used for the feedlot that is right up there in the northeast corner. About 5 years ago, maybe a little more, a lot of the local producers got together and put some money together to expand and to renovate that feedlot. Has 105 pens it has 105 new pens. There are the older pens as well. Has a really nice handling facility. And we've been able to utilize that in the cropping side because some of the specialty crops that we grow, a good example is field peas. we were able to, grow the field peas, and we take them up there, and they incorporated those field peas in the diet of the cows. Some of the early research shows that feeding the field peas to the cows can increase the meat tenderness if you finish them on the field peas. And so the question is well, how how can we market that? Can we get a premium on the meat? And that, as well as we need to decide how we're going to set the price on those peas that are not going to the human market. So there's a lot of work that can go on there as well. I wanted to point out the Norholden long-term manure plots. Those were established in 1912, so they just celebrated their 100-year birthday. They've been in continuous corn for that entire time. So it's been continuous corn. It's furrow irrigated, and so there's different rates of manure that are applied out there. So there's one plot that's the control. It's never had an ounce of fertilizer or manure in 100+ years. And I'll tell you, the corn this year, as well as the last who knows how long, it still grows corn, but it's about knee waist high and really, really yellow. Imagine that if you don't put fertilizer on it. So, but it's really cool. For its 100th birthday, we celebrated by making it bigger. It now has more applications, and the treatments were updated to be more in line with the manure applications that are more common today. So it should be good to go for another 100 years. I don't know if that one treatment that doesn't get any fertilizer will be good to go, but everything else looks pretty good. So it's a really good facility to have, and it's close by the Scottsbluff Center. The High Plains Ag Lab is where I do the most of my work. It's primarily dryland crops. Again, it's high elevation, a little over 4,000 feet. It does have a little bit of limited irrigation on about 40 acres. This section right in through here has a lateral that goes through it. We don't have enough water to really irrigate that whole area, but we can, if we need a little bit of water, it can supplement some of that stuff. I put a plot of corn underneath it this year with the idea that if I wanted to stress the corn, but I didn't want to kill it. I wanted to be able to have something to combine at the end of the year. So I put it there just in case I needed a little, bit of water on it. And so far it looks pretty good. This year it won't need any water, so it's just a good resource to have. There's another area that we call the BQMS site that's used for biotechnology research that's out north. It's kind of separate from the rest of the farm. It has irrigation as well. We have 710 acres of a dry land there. It's split up into basically about 25-acre fields that have 7 different rotations. We'll talk about those here in a moment, as well as 1,600 acres of pasture. Again, it's divided up into different pastures, and we use that for grazing studies. It's also convenient because we can bring the cows off the pasture and into the fields to do grazing studies right there close. We don't have to really transport the cows too far, which makes it easy for doing that type of research. I do want to point out we do have a recently completed building there that was a huge plus. It made our technicians that are stationed down there full-time happy. It was recently completed and dedicated, and it has a new name to honor Charlie Fencer, who was a dryland crops guy. He started back in 1956 and retired in the early 70s. The other thing I wanted to point out about HPAL is that it has an advisory board that is made up of local growers and producers and folks that are in the industry down in that area. And that's really unique. I think this year there's about 33 people on that advisory board that meet at least once a year. We get together, these growers and producers, we discuss the kind of research that's going on at HPAL. They give us feedback. They can give us ideas on what they think that we should be doing. And it's a really good relationship, and it's something that's pretty unique and it's highly valued. When HPAL was started, we call it HPAL. That's, of course, an acronym for that. But when that was started, they were big players in getting it up and going. So this advisory board was with this farm from the very beginning and helped to get the farm up and running. So it's something we'll definitely keep going into the future. The different crop rotations that we do, you'll see that wheat is in all of them, and from there, that's where the similarities end. Again, these are kind of typically 25-acre field rotations. There's anywhere from 2 to 4 fields per rotation. And you can see we have a lot of different crops out there. We have millet, wheat, sunflower, and we just put peas in recently into the rotation. We'll talk more about peas in a while, and we have corn as well. So it's a really diverse rotation system. We are able to collect really good data on these over the years. We have all the yield data going back, and all the management practices going back, and so we have a really strong, a good group of information. And just an example, I had a guy from Colorado State call me up recently, and he was looking for some places that he could come out, and he's doing some crop rotation research. He wanted to do some soil sampling and some history on some of the management practices. And I said, well, we got the perfect place. We got the rotations that that you're after. You can come out, you can soil sample, and we have all the history there. And so it was perfect. It was exactly what he was after. And this is something that we can kind of update as we go along, as crops come and go. So the rangeland we have out there, we have the Sioux Experimental Range, which is about 800 acres. We don't do as much research up there as we should, because we have the Goodmanson, which is where most of the research occurs, where they have about 1,200 acres of meadows and marsh areas, and about 1,200 acres of rangeland. So it's a good size. It's pretty much an operating cattle ranch where they have their own herd of cows that they and they raise their own replacement heifers and everything. So it really is a good system that they have out there, and it's been really beneficial for our two animal. Well, we have 2 animal science guys plus a forage range guy out there at the Panhandle Center. That they do quite a bit of work there, and I know a lot of the folks at the West Central Research Center also do quite a bit of work there at the Goodmanson. So who do we have out there at the Panhandle Center right now? We have 2 breeding specialists. We have a guy that works in the specialty crops, which is Deepak, and he primarily does most of his work in millet, but he also works a lot in sunflowers and fenugreek, and he had some field peas out this year, as well as he had the brown mustard and things. I don't think he got much off the brown mustard. The birds got a lot off of it, but I don't think he did because the birds got in there. We have a really good dry bean breeding program. The beans primarily are the pinto and the Great Northern beans. And Carlos does a really good job out there. The 2 positions in red are ones that are currently vacant, and we're looking to get those filled soon. The weed management one is far along in the process. The soil scientist position will hopefully be filled next July. We have a potato guy. We have 2 animal science guys here. And the guys in blue, including myself, the Dryland crops, we have a forage range guy and an irrigation engineer that were hired within the last 6 months. And so we're getting a good influx of new hires out there, which has created a pretty good excitement and I guess new energy. And hopefully we'll be able to develop a good relationship and get a lot of grad students out that way as well. So a little bit of the background on the ag production in the Panhandle. It started, most of the ground was broken in the early 1900s. Primarily they were just small homesteads where they would fence off an area. It was mostly, they would do a wheat fallow rotation, or they were growing corn, potatoes, and dry beans as well. But they would grow the crop, and then they would turn the cows out. They had, most of them had a small dairy herd or something. They would turn those cows out during the fallow year, and they would graze, out in that pasture until the following year. The wheat yields back then were anywhere from 5 to 12 bushel an acre. So we've come a long way since then as far as yield. A big change that happened, and these got really bleached out a little bit, but was the Dust Bowl of the 1930s just really changed the way ag was done out there in the Panhandle. This is a map of the drought in that time period, and you'll see it right there in the, it's the Oklahoma Panhandle is where the injury was, and the damage from the dust storm was most severe. And it moved up through Nebraska, and you'll see this area of drought went up. You can't really see Nebraska, but it went up through the Panhandle, and it really changed how things were done out there. We had a lot of wind damage. You can still see, if you know where to look, you can still see the sand dunes, that were blown, up over fence lines and things are still out there where people just pretty much abandoned, their farm and said, I'm going to go somewhere else. So it really changed the way, the farming was done out there at that time. So you can't talk about ag in the Panhandle without talking about this man, who was Charlie Fenster. The first time I met him was during my job interview process. He came in for my seminar. He is 96 years old, and he still goes like he's 30. He still has his planner in his pocket, and he keeps that planner really full and busy. He volunteers now at the Legacy of the Plains Museum almost every day. He can sit out there and he can talk about all the old equipment, and he tells the story of conservation dryland agriculture. So he started back in 1956 working for the university, and he was a big proponent of residue management. And I've known him for only a few months now, but every time I see him, he always emphasizes the importance of residue management, and he'll tell anybody he meets, the first thing you have to do is grow something that will produce residue, and then keep the residue on there. That's number one. And so he really changed the face of agriculture out in the Panhandle, and developed a lot of the equipment and techniques of the tillage and things were developed based on ideas that he had and other folks out there had. Going up through the 60s, up through the 80s, strip tillage and conservation tillage was really popular. What this accomplished basically was folks would do, it was the wheat fallow system, and they would, instead of having an entire field that was fallow that would be prone to blowing away and erosion, they would do these strips. So you always had something growing, and that would help protect the soil, and it was really key in getting the yields to basically triple from the the late 60s into the 70s. Now you say triple like it's going places, but we were really low, 10 bushel to the acre, going up to now we're into 30 to 35 bushel the acre at that time. So it was a big jump, and it really changed the way agriculture was done out there. So the Panhandle agriculture today, there's about 6,000 farms. The majority, 63%, is in rangeland. About a quarter of it is in dryland crops, and a small percentage is 800,000 acres is irrigated farms, about 10%. We have about almost 300,000 cows out on the range, and about 700,000 that are in feedlots out there in the Panhandle. So the beef industry out there really drives the agronomy as far as the economy goes out in that area. Looking at how that breaks down for crop acreage, you see that wheat is still king out there in the Panhandle, with about 30% of it grown across the crop acreage. Corn is another big one, but with the grass hay and the alfalfa, that makes up a big portion because we got to feed all those cows. And so that's where the majority of, that's kind of the breakdown. I want to point out that you see that potato is less than 1%, and you see that sugar beets is about 2%, and you'll see here in a little bit that really changes as far as impact on the local economy out there. So the average farm size in the Panhandle is about 3,000 acres. Again, we have most of the value is in livestock sales, and a little bit, 30% is through crop sales. And so those are kind of a few of the stats, you'll see a lot of the farms are just really small, and I'm sure that weighs on a lot of those averages. And this is what I wanted to point out. You see the impact that sugar beets has, although it was only 2% of the total acreage. It's a real driver in the local economy. We do have a sugar factory out there that processes the beets in the Scotts Bluff. You'll see it's really labor intensive. You'll see, during the harvest, it's just barely starting up. A lot of trucks on the road. They truck beets all through the winter pretty much. And so it's a really big boon on the local economy. Again, you see the other big players is wheat, corn, and hay. That's kind of the breakdown. Oh, the other one I wanted to point out was potatoes. Again, it's kind of although it was a small percentage, it brings a lot to the local economy as far as value. So as far as dryland crops is concerned, about 600,000 acres are in wheat. That's down about 60% from I'll say the mid-90s. It's really decreased as these other crops have come in and as people have tried to diversify their operations. The corn is about 100,000 acres now. In the 90s, it was, in the mid-90s, it was only about 10,000 acres. So that's really changed over the last I guess 10 to 20 years. A lot of that's been just better corn varieties. A lot more folks are starting to plant that out in dryland areas. With the dryland corn, it is high risk. A lot of crop failures occur. So with the low corn price like we have right now, there's not much incentive to be putting corn out there on the dryland because it's not worth the risk. Crustal millets, again, is a really important crop. It's unique in that it's planted typically in July. So it's planted really late, which allows you to control a lot of your problem weeds early on. And it gets harvested. Well, it's getting harvested right now. So it only grows for a few months. You can plant it, you can get it off, and it does quite well. It's used primarily out there. A lot of it goes to the birdseed market. And we do have a lot of birdseed companies out there in the area, down in Sydney as well as into Colorado. Sunflower is an important crop as well. Both the oilseed sunflowers as well as the confectionery sunflowers. This year, with the corn being so depressed, we actually had folks that were replacing their irrigated corn for irrigated sunflower because they figured that that they had a better chance of making money with the sunflower versus the corn. And so out there we have the ability to kind of make those changes with the diversity and as well as we have the infrastructure for all these different crops, which is an important aspect. I will point out quickly this header. You'll probably ask, well, why don't we have a green, a grain header on that combine? This is a stripper header that all it does is it goes along and pops the wheat heads off the off the wheat, and so it doesn't cut the stem at all, which leaves lots of residue in the field because you're able to leave 3 foot tall wheat residue, which is important out there for conserving the soil moisture and catching the snow. We can also use that to harvest crops like the field peas, and it does a really good job. So that's an important tool for the residue management out there. I want to talk about the field peas because this is a crop that's really come on in the last few years and has gained popularity not only in the Panhandle but in Colorado and Wyoming and up in the Dakotas a little bit. It kind of started in 2012 with a few local growers. They got together with a co-op because, you can go and plant a crop, but if you don't have a place to take it, then you're going to have a problem. So they worked with the co-op to develop, they said, we'll grow all these field peas if you guys will, put the storage in and we'll buy them from us. So the first year they had about 10,000 acres that were planted in the Panhandle. Up to this year, we're anticipating we were right up around 80,000 acres. So it's really come in strong, and it kind of goes back. It ties in with the that feedlot thing. If we have some rejected peas that are at the elevator, do we have another place that we can take them? And so field peas are good in that regard, as well as they seem like they are a good fit for the system. They're planted in the early spring, and they're off by early summer. So some of the current research that that we're working on, we do a lot of variety trials. We have so many crops out there. We do a lot of variety trials. This is the main ones we've done. Again, we have other ones like brown mustard and who knows what else Steve Hawk is planting out there. I don't even go look anymore. But he just has all sorts of stuff going on. But we do a lot of wheat, proso millet, field peas, sunflowers, sorghum, all out there. Trying to find what what varieties are best fit. Usually we're looking for something that's both drought tolerant and cold tolerant. That's usually the key for out there. The winter canola has been a challenge in that we have been trying to get that to grow for the last 3-4 years down there in Sydney, and every year it comes up just fine in the fall, and then winter kills because of our temperature fluctuations. The growers have been asking for another winter crop that they can get in the fall, and we thought this would be a good fit. And so far, we haven't had much success as far as getting it to come out of the spring. We've tried a lot of different things. We're trying again this year. We'll see how it goes. But it's one that we haven't been able to get to work. And if you look at where the canolas are grown, we're about right in the middle. South of us, it's all winter canola. North of us, it's all spring canola. We're right in that margin where we don't know which way we're going to go, but we really want to get that winter canola to work. And so we've been working to see if we can find a variety that'll work there. Other research that we've done this past year and recently, we've been looking on the dryland is to do some annual forage production for the cattle market. We do a lot of herbicide evaluations. We do some nutrient stuff with corn, growth regulators on wheat to see if we apply that in the fall, is that going to get us a better stand? Are we going to get more tillering, or should we apply that in the spring? We do a lot of wheat seed treatment stuff, wheat fungicide work. Again, the canola, where we're looking at in this case, we're working with planting it into residue so we can get that residue to kind of protect the seedlings from the harsh weather, and maybe that'll help. And we do a lot of entomology work as well. We have, like everywhere else, we have bugs out there, believe it or not. I also wanted to mention this research that goes on. This is our long-term tillage work that we have out there at the High Plains Ag Lab. It was started in the 1970, or it was started in 1970. What they did then was they went out and they found an area out in our pasture and basically broke the native sod. So it was, and they used these different treatments. These blocks right here that you're seeing, these are the native sod that they left. It's a wheat fallow rotation, and they have these different tillage treatments, and they're able to see how the soil structure and health has changed basically over time based on these treatments, and they can compare it back to the sod treatments to see how it's changed. And this has been a very productive site. There's a lot of publications that have been done from this plot. So where do we want this to go, and what are we going to work on? One of the big concerns, pretty much everywhere you go, he told me he was going to leave. He's not angry, I promise. Yeah, we'll see you. Is weed resistance research. We're really concerned about it out there, especially kochia. This is a picture of kochia. If you're not familiar with kochia, it's a tumbleweed. It's going to roll across your field from your neighbors, and it's going to spread the seed all the way across your field. And so we're really concerned about it, mostly because we have some limitations out there and the biggest one is that growers don't want to spend the money. We have really limited inputs that folks are willing to put into their crops, especially when you're talking dryland crops out there, because they're not going to get the money back. So they're after spending, they want to spend $10 to $20 an acre tops for their weed control. And if they lose some of their cheap herbicides like glyphosate or 2,4-D, they don't want to go spend the big money on these other herbicides. So they want something that's going to be cheap and effective. And when we start to tell them, well, you need to start spending more and use better herbicides and more modes of action, that's not what they want to hear. So this is going to be a big thing in the future. So the kind of research we are interested in is doing weed surveys so we can monitor the progress of these resistant weeds, work with the chemical companies and develop programs that are going to be cheap and effective. That's important for our growers out there. See what cultural practices we can do to maybe reduce the impact of these weeds. Can we do a narrower row spacings, earlier plantings, late plantings, or we could even do some minimum tillage. We really don't want to use the tillage because we got to protect the residue, or we're going to lose our advantage as far as being able to produce good yields. And then the last thing is education, to get out and teach those growers what they need to do to protect themselves. We're going to initiate a long-term crop rotation study out there at Sydney this year, or next spring, I should say. We're going to have about 10 crop rotations that we're really interested in, mainly because we have a lot of different crops that are in our system out there, and they all play off of one another. And so we need to see, with this crop synergy, what crops should be following which crops. I was out with a grower this last week, and he long ago abandoned using fallow, and he does a wheat, corn, sunflower, millet rotation. And I said, I'm really surprised that you plant corn or sunflowers after corn, because corn's a really heavy user of nutrients and water. And he said the sunflowers do the best when it follows corn. That's what he's found. And I was really surprised by that, because we typically say, well, we need to follow wheat or a fallow period. And he's convinced, he's been doing this for 15, 20 years now, he's convinced it's best to follow the corn with sunflowers. And so stuff like that, we need to better understand. Another one that's really common now that you'll hear a lot of is that folks say that if you follow field peas with wheat, you'll see a positive increase in the yield. And that's something that we need to explore and see if that's really true. So that's where this kind of study is going to come in. We're also going to be watching kind of the profitability and the economic side of these rotations, and the long-term, health of the soil. One thing that's going to be neat in this rotation is that in year 12, all the rotations will be back to wheat, and everything will be planted at wheat on a year 12. So we'll be able to see at year 12 if we have big differences across those wheat yields. It'll also give us a chance to play with some of these alternative crops and to see which crops can fit into these systems. Because if we're going to get these crops in there, we need to know if they should go, behind wheat, in front of wheat, or where they're going to play. We're going to keep working with alternative crops. There's a lot of demand for, especially this year when you have a year where prices are down. Folks are like, well, I can't plant corn. Wheat's going down. What should I be planting out there? And I was like, well, I don't have a really good answer. There was a gentleman out there who happened to plant safflower along a really busy highway. So everybody driving by sees it, and my phone just keeps ringing about all these guys saying, hey, I saw this safflower. Should I plant safflower? I said, well, I don't know if you should plant safflower. But safflower is an interesting crop, and it is a good fit for the birdseed market that we do have out there. The question is it a good fit for our crop rotation system, and can we do it profitably, and can we find the market for it? So with the alternative crops, of course, market development, you have to have a place to take it, otherwise it's not going to take off. So we'll start to do some work with the safflower. We'll start to look at other crops as well to see where we can fit those. Another thing that we're going to work with is incorporating cattle into the dryland systems. One thing that we've found is that cover crops are not really a good fit for out there because they use water and we don't have much of it to go around. But they might have a fit if we can graze the cattle on some of their the crop residue, and we can put something out there that they can graze, a summer annual, where we can capture some of that benefit in the cows. Yeah, we might take a hit on some of our yield the following year, but if we can offset that by an increase in our, if we can offset that with some increased value in our cows, we can take the value with the cows or the crop. We'll see where that fits. But that's something like this year we have a lot of residue from the rain we had. We have wheat residue that's probably this tall. We're having the residue. It's like, well, how much can we graze off, and can we get a benefit out of it? I had a grower that showed me this year where he had grazed cows on some of his wheat stubble. He felt like he had a better stand of safflower or sunflowers the following, this year. So there's a lot of things like that that can be worked on. More importantly, how's it going to impact the next year's crop? That's a big question. And I'll kind of wrap up with this slide. It goes over the kind of the sustainabilities of systems. And as we get drier and as we get hotter, it gets really hard to achieve that balance of being sustainable because we are really limited by by the water and by the heat. Basically the weather, and how can we have a system where we can, basically, protect our crop residue, and watch out for herbicide-resistant weeds, and bring it all together and be sustainable long term. That's our biggest challenge out there. Is those folks don't want to, well, they can't spend a lot of money on their crops, on a per acre basis. They are really limited, and so this is the big driver on why people do what they do out there as far as residue and the weed management and crop rotation, and it's really difficult to achieve. And depending on how the climate changes in the future, it's going to continue to be a problem. So with that, I appreciate your time, and I hope you were able to learn something about the Panhandle area. Again, my overreaching goal of this whole process was first to be able to come out here and kind of be known a little bit better, as well as introduce the Panhandle to a lot of folks that might not know all that goes on out there. And hopefully maybe you'll see something that was maybe sparked your interest, or that you could in the future possibly do some work out there as well. So with that, I guess we'll wrap up and take a few questions.